A lot of writers think you can't find your narrative voice, but rather it's something inherent that develops over time with practice. I believe that voice is part deliberate choice on the author's part and part subconscious, and that we don't always notice or control the voice that comes out when we're writing. We can imagine voice as a shimmer of influence, as author Ross Gay says of poet Lucille Clifton, a glimmering evidence of something beyond oneself. The voice is something that, at least in part, is given. In that sense, narrative voice is an accumulation of what we read and watch, the culture we grow up in, the people we know, how we talk, and our own attitudes about the world. But voice can also be shaped through practice and attention. Some stories have a voice that's so unique you'd recognize the author from just one paragraph. Take this passage. One Kashmiri morning in the early spring of 1915, my grandfather Adam Aziz hit his nose against a frost-hardened tussock of earth while attempting to pray. 3 drops of blood plopped out of his left nostril, hardened instantly in the brittle air, and lay before his eyes on the prayer mat, transformed into rubies. Lurching back until he knelt with his head once more upright, he found that the tears which had sprung to his eyes had solidified too, and at that moment, as he brushed diamonds contemptuously from his lashes, he resolved never again to kiss earth for any god or man. This decision, however, made a hole in him, a vacancy in a vital inner chamber, leaving him vulnerable to women and history. This excerpt is from Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, a novel of magical realism that serves as an allegory for India as a country. Rushdie has a highly distinctive narrative voice across all his novels, which one reader describes as indulgent, decadent prose. His books often featured a self-satisfied narrator and dense stories of epic length. Pause and read this paragraph again. Which word choices stand out to you? I'm drawn to the rubies and diamonds, as well as the frost-hardened tussock of earth, because they're highly visual details. The voice is over the top in terms of description, with touches of humor in the final line, leaving him vulnerable to women and history. Rushdie's word choices convey feelings and images. Those elements tend to stick out in our minds because they ignite different senses, and they tap into our understanding of the narrator as a person. To me, narrative voice is emotion coming through on the page. It's passion, it's opinion, it's personality. That emotion is conveyed through the diction, which is word choice, syntax, which is sentence structure, and details, what the narrator notices, and the curation of meaning through those details. Importantly, narrative voice can change depending on the story's tone and the character's perspective, especially in first-person point of view, where the story is told directly in the voice of a specific character through the pronouns I, me, and my. Style and narrative voice can be viewed as 2 separate ideas, with style belonging more to the author as the creator, and narrative voice belonging more to the individual story or character. Narrative voice relates to who is telling the story, whereas style is how the story is told. The author has the power to change both from story to story. Voice is related to identity and the character's emotional experience. Look at 2 coming-of-age novels told in first-person point of view with different voices. The Catcher in the Rye has Holden's sardonic, slang-filled voice. The Perks of Being a Wallflower has Charlie's earnest and reflective letters. Style pertains to techniques and structure, the storytelling tools the writer uses. Compared to post-apocalyptic novels with different styles, The Road is economical in its prose, with staccato sentences, whereas Station 11 is more introspective and descriptive. Related to both voice and style is tone, which is how the story feels to the reader. You can have the same subject matter, but a change in tone creates an entirely different emotional journey. All Quiet on the Western Front is somber and tragic, compared to MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors, which is darkly comedic and absurdist, but both novels are about war. Voice, style, and tone are intertwined and influence each other so much that these distinctions are less important than finding what vibe fits the story you're trying to tell. Some authors, like Rushdie, have an idiosyncratic style that exists across their body of work, especially if they primarily write in third person. Others have a versatile style that they adapt to different characters and genres, like Silvia Moreno Garcia. Voice comes from viewing the story through a particular lens. By putting on that lens as an author, whether the view is rosy or murky, you are creating a narrator. That narrator is separate from you as the author, even when you're using a more omniscient third-person perspective and reporting on what the characters are doing from a distance. This distinction is important because when you can differentiate between yourself as the author and the story's narrator, you can shape the story's voice to match your goals. Let's take a description of a traffic jam from two different characters' perspectives. The first narrator has a wry and dark view of the world. There they were, stuck like ants in single file down a predetermined path, each metal death trap carrying a sad meat bag stuffed with nothing but empty thoughts and wasted potential. The other character has a more whimsical and light-hearted approach to life. The line of cars gleamed silver and scarlet and sapphire. Some had rolled their windows down. Others tapped their fingers on the steering wheel to an unheard beat. It was as if everyone might burst out of their cars and start singing the opening number from La La Land at any moment. These are two very different voices in the same scenario. Different word choices, sentence rhythms, and details create different tones, because these descriptions are coming from two fundamentally different narrators, even though I wrote both of these examples. I'm not saying they're great examples, but each is certainly filtered through a particular lens. Take my La La Land detail. That's clearly informed by the media I consume. And my description of people as sad meatbags is definitely a byproduct of being an American kid coming of age in the early 2000s. Voice comes from what details we choose to include and which we omit. If a character is exploring a house and they're more interested in the record player than the animal skulls, that tells us something about them as a person. Internally, maybe their mind wanders to daydreaming about their crush, or maybe they're stuck reliving old mistakes in their head. Those different modes of thinking will change the voice too. Writer's Edit has great advice about this lens we use with narrative voice. Be aware of what makes your observations unique. Everyone sees the world through their own unconventional lens, but not everyone is aware of the existence of those lenses. That's when it becomes important to take a step back and become aware. Pay attention to what you pay attention to as a writer, and to what your character might pay attention to in any given scene. It's not only how the character is noticing things through their language, but what they notice. So, how do you develop a voice? I have 5 methods you can try. First, write, and write a lot. Try different genres and points of view. Write a more humorous, lighthearted piece with wordplay, then follow it up with a soul-crushing horror story full of dense prose. Write what you want to write, because then you'll be motivated to create more often. The more you write, the more you'll be able to see those patterns in your own work that define your voice as an author across tones, genres, and different projects. Sometimes a single sentence will pop into your mind and become the touchstone for the story's voice. But it can also be something you discover as you go along in a project. You can take your time and write your way into the voice. Second, imitate other authors. I have a video on what I call echo exercises, where I type up a few pages of a book I admire, reading it aloud. I analyze the author's stylistic choices, characterization, and scene structure. After that, I do an imitation, an echo, trying to write in their style. This is also called copy work. This exercise can help you discover what techniques fit your style and what don't. You find new ways to construct sentences and convey ideas. Through reading and imitation, you learn to control your style and tone, contributing to that narrative voice for a specific story. Your own voice will inevitably be a mishmash of the hundreds of voices you've consumed as a reader, So the more you can consciously recognize your narrative choices, the better you can make your words convey what you want them to convey. Also pay attention to what resonates with you in your own reading. Who are your literary influences? Think about times when a narrator's voice really clicked with how your mind works. How can you recreate that type of connection in your own writing? Some people worry that mimicking other writers dilutes their own voice or makes them sound derivative. Author George Saunders provides an explanation for this discomfort. When writing in that voice, you don't feel like you can tell the truth as you see it. The voice feels forced, fake. Saunders describes it as wearing someone else's ill-fitting clothes and trying to feel like yourself. He says, "The young writer will find that no matter how close she gets to recreating the voice of her hero, something's missing. What is it? Well, it's her precious, hard-earned, lived experience." Saunders suggests that we can't get to our own deep truths in someone else's voice. And it's through melding your own lived experience and sensibilities with parts of another author's techniques that you can better reflect your own truth in a story's narrative voice. Third, lean into your strengths and be the best version of yourself. You're always going to have weaknesses, and you should strive to improve upon them, but you'll have more success if you play to your strengths. Personality and voice come from how you stand out from the crowd. Also recognize that the writer you are isn't always the same as the writer you wish to be. I know plenty of writers who want a more lush literary style, yet they write in a straightforward way and have other strengths, such as pacing, humor, or dialogue. We often envy what we don't have while downplaying the skills others would kill to have. Just know that you're never stuck with one style or voice because you can always cultivate your different strengths to suit the story at hand. Think about what you do best, do it even better, and you'll be writing toward a stronger voice. In the immortal words of Fred Rogers, "You are a very special person. There's only one like you in the whole world. There's never been anyone exactly like you before. And there will never be again. Only you. And people can like you exactly as you are." Fourth, remember that voice emerges through revision. To quote George Saunders again, "You don't need to get everything right on the first draft. Parts of the writing will sound flat and need punching up, and that's exactly what editing is for. If you're too bogged down by every word choice when you're drafting, you won't pay attention to the larger story, which creates problems that are harder to fix. You can go back through and revise the prose with those details and voice in mind, so try to focus on the big picture during your first draft." Saunders adds, "Voice might be seen as that which occurs when we allow ourselves to make these small choices again and again within the same text over a surprisingly long duration of time." Finally, when you get feedback, ask what other people identify as your key attributes. I naturally write in the style of commercial fiction, because that's what I grew up reading. After I'd been writing and publishing short stories for several years, I felt I had a good sense of my own voice. This was my self-assessment. My writing style involves simple but carefully crafted sentences, and the flow carries the reader along. My tone is generally lighthearted or dreamlike, with a touch of earnestness. I tend to write a lot about the relationships between people, and my stories are often more dialogue heavy. After I wrote that, I asked my critique partners how they would describe my writing. One of them shared, "I'd say you write character-centered stories that handle difficult and sometimes dark internal conflicts with honesty and empathy. The delivery tends to be forthright, but with colorful descriptions of sensory details." Another person said, "Diane's writing style is warm and emotive, and her description is focused inwardly on character emotions and thoughts, rather than outwardly on setting or physical description. She is not afraid of metaphors or descriptive language." You can see that the perception of my writing is pretty consistent across all three viewpoints, which tells me that I do have a defined narrative voice, even if I don't always feel that way. Now, I want you to identify 3 hallmarks of your own style or narrative voice, whether in general or for a particular project. These should be your greatest strengths, or what stands out in your writing. Think of specific things like interesting details or good pacing, Or consider adjectives. Is your writing descriptive, action-oriented, or introspective? For mine, I might choose interiority, warmth, and strong dialogue. Keep those gifts in mind as we go into 2 writing exercises. One will focus on the story's tone, and the other on a specific character's perspective. An excellent example of story tone comes from fantasy author Laini Taylor. She has this lush, beautiful prose that is focused on creating magical images in the reader's mind. I've read almost all of her books, and this voice remains consistent for every one of them. Here's an excerpt from her short story collection, Lips Touch 3 Times, read by my friend and fellow author, Jeanette Nielsen.
Kizzy wanted to be a woman who would dive off the prow of a sailboat into the sea, who would fall back in a tangle of sheets laughing, and who could dance a tango, lazily stroke a leopard with her bare foot, freeze an enemy's blood with rice, make promises she couldn't possibly keep, and then shift the world to keep them. She wanted to write memoirs and autograph them at a tiny bookshop in Rome, with a line of admirers snaking down a pink-lit alley. She wanted to make love on a balcony, ruin someone, trade in esoteric knowledge, watch strangers as coolly as a cat. She wanted to be inscrutable, have a drink named after her, a love song written for her, and a handsome adventurous small airplane champagne christened Kizzy, which would vanish one day in a windstorm in Arabia, so that she would have to mount a rescue operation involving camels and wear an indigo veil against the stinging sand, just like the nomads. Kizzy wanted.
I love this passage because it's full of yearning, which makes sense for a fantasy romance story. For this first writing exercise, choose a genre and let that inform the tone. I suggest comedy, fantasy, or horror, since all of those have very strong voice markers. You immediately know that something is a comedy, for example. Choose your intended tone, and then write a list in that tone, like Laini Taylor does in that excerpt. You can use first, second, or third person point of view. Set a timer for 7 minutes, and try to write at least 3 sentences. For our character perspective exercise, I have an example from the classic Western novel True Grit by Charles Portis. This book has fantastic dialogue throughout, and it's told from the first-person perspective of Maddie Ross, a teen girl known for being spirited and direct, which you can sense from her opening paragraph, read by the talented poet Mandy Shannara.
People do not give it credence that a 14-year-old girl can leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood, but it did not seem so strange then, although I will say it did not happen every day. I was just 14 years of age when a coward going by the name of Tom Cheney shot my father down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and robbed him of his life and his horse and $150 in cash money, plus 2 California gold pieces that he carried in his trouser band.
It's obvious that the narrator harbors justified anger toward the man who has killed her father, calling him a coward who robbed her father of his life. Her list of all the other things stolen from her father adds to the outrage in her voice and lets you see that she is a competent, detail-oriented character. For this writing exercise, think of a character you've already created. Write a paragraph where they describe someone they hate in a way that you can tell how they feel about the person without them having to say it. Just like how we sense that Maddie despises Tom Cheney. Let that emotion come through in the voice and filter the description through their perspective. Set another 7-minute timer for yourself and see what you come up with. Narrative voice is the reader's entry point into a story and a way to establish immediate emotional engagement. Many literary agents and editors are looking for novels that are voicey, meaning books where the writing pops off the page with personality. Not just anybody could tell this story. It had to be this author and this character, all with the intent of inspiring feeling in the reader, whether it's curiosity or disgust, fear or wonder. Keep in mind that it's not just word choice and sentence structure that contributes to voice. as author Joss Sippy cautions on Gotham writers. Sippy references a definition of voice from Meg Rossoff as the deepest possible reflection of who you are, and that the job of your voice is not to seduce or flatter or make well-shaped sentences. In your voice, your readers should be able to hear the contents of your mind, your heart, your soul. All your stories will contain pieces of you and bear your individual fingerprint, whether you recognize it or not. I've created a handout with these tips and writing exercises that you're free to download in the video description. Teachers, you're welcome to use this in your classrooms as you wish. I want to leave you with this quote from one of my favorite authors, Khaled Hosseini. I entered the literary world really from outside. My entire background has been in sciences. I was a biology major in college, then went to medical school. I've never had any formal training in writing. So what I know about writing, I know from my own instincts, and whatever the narrative voice is in my own head. Listen to that narrative voice in your own head. That voice will guide your storytelling and make it feel authentic. Let the words flow from who you are as a person. They will evolve with you across time. What 3 adjectives would you use to describe your writing style? Throw them at me in the comments. Whatever you do, keep writing.